Cahokia Indigenous Bloodline, St. Louis, Missouri. Ancestors' Chosen Healer, Obe's Awakening. Chapter 1. The Sacred Visit. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the ancient Cahokia Mounds. Obe, a tall, lean 16-year-old with deep-set eyes and raven-black hair, stood at the base of the largest mound, Monk's Mound, with his friends Foster, Alexis, and Morgan. The four had been inseparable since childhood, and their shared curiosity had brought them to this sacred site. Can you believe that these mounds were built by hand thousands of years ago? Alexis whispered, her voice filled with awe. Morgan, always the skeptic, snorted. Probably just a bunch of dirt piled up over time. Obe, however, felt something different. As he placed his hand on the cool earth of the mound, a strange surge of energy coursed through him. It was as if the very ground beneath him was alive, pulsating with an ancient power. "Are you okay, Obe?" Foster asked, noticing Obe's distant expression. Obe blinked, pulling his hand away. "Yeah, just felt something weird for a moment." The group began their ascent, following the wooden steps that led to the top of Monk's Mound. With each step, Obe felt the energy grow stronger, almost magnetic. It tugged at his very core, urging him to connect, to understand. At the summit, the view was breathtaking. The vast expanse of the Mississippi floodplain stretched out before them, dotted with smaller mounds and dense forests. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Alexis, always the history buff, began to recount tales of the ancient Cahokians. They were one of the most advanced civilizations of their time, she said. They had a complex society, with priests, warriors, and even astronomers. Some say they could predict eclipses and had intricate ceremonies to appease the gods. As she spoke, Obe felt a deep connection to the stories, as if they were part of his own history. He could almost see the ancient Cahokians, going about their daily lives, performing rituals, and gazing up at the same sky. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept across the mound, carrying with it a faint whisper. Obe strained to listen, but the words were elusive, slipping through his grasp like smoke. "What was that?" Morgan asked, looking around nervously. "Just the wind," Foster replied, though he too seemed unsettled. But Obe knew it was more than just the wind. The mounds, the land, the very air around them was charged with an energy that he couldn't explain. It was as if the spirits of the ancient Cahokians were still present, watching over their sacred land. The group spent some more time exploring the site, visiting the interpretive center and learning more about the history and culture of the Cahokians. But as the day wore on, and the shadows grew longer, an unspoken agreement passed between them. It was time to leave. As they made their way back to the car, Obe couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The energy he had felt at the mounds had not dissipated. Instead, it seemed to have taken root within him, filling him with a newfound vitality. "You guys up for some ice cream?" Foster suggested as they drove away. The others agreed, but Obe was lost in his thoughts. He felt different, more alive than he had ever felt before. It was as if he had been plugged into a vast reservoir of energy, and he was now fully charged, ready to take on the world. But with this newfound power came a sense of responsibility. Obe knew that he had been given a gift, one that he couldn't take lightly. He had been touched by the spirits of the ancient Cahokians, and he was now their chosen one. As the car sped down the highway, the lights of St. Louis twinkling in the distance, Obe made a silent vow. He would honor the legacy of the Cahokians and use his gift for the greater good. But little did he know the true nature of his power and the challenges that lay ahead. Chapter 2. Grandmother's Miracle. The evening sun cast a warm, golden hue over Obe's home as he entered, the events at the Cahokia Mounds still fresh in his mind. The house, a quaint two-story structure, had been in his family for generations. Its wooden floors creaked with age, and the walls held memories of countless family gatherings. As Obe hung his jacket, he heard the muffled sound of his mother's voice coming from the living room. Curiosity piqued. He tiptoed closer, recognizing the tone of worry that laced her words. "I just don't know, Lila," his mother was saying, her voice quivering. "She's been so weak lately, and the doctors say it might be pneumonia. At her age, it's serious." Obe's heart sank. His grandmother, a robust and spirited woman even in her 80s, had been the cornerstone of his life. The thought of her being gravely ill was unbearable. Without thinking, he whispered, almost to himself, "I wish her a full and immediate recovery." The house seemed to respond. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and for a brief moment, the air grew cold. Obe shivered, feeling that same surge of energy he'd felt at the Mounds. It coursed through him, then seemed to dissipate into the surroundings. In the living room, there was a sudden silence, followed by a sharp intake of breath from his mother. "Mother? Are you all right?" she asked, panic evident in her voice. There was a pause, then a fit of coughing from the other end of the line. I need to get some water," came the frail reply. "I'll call you back." Obe retreated to his room, his mind racing. Had he caused that? Was his wish somehow connected to his grandmother's sudden reaction? Hours seemed to drag on. Obe lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. The weight of the day's events pressed down on him, and he felt a mix of hope and fear. Hope that he truly had a gift, and fear of the unknown implications. The ringing of the phone jolted him from his reverie. He heard his mother's voice, filled with astonishment. "Mother? Is that really you? You sound different." Obe crept closer, straining to hear the conversation. "I don't know what happened, dear," came the voice of his grandmother, now strong and clear. "One moment I was feeling so weak, and the next, it's as if a weight has been lifted. I feel rejuvenated, like I've shed years off my age." His mother laughed, relief evident in her voice. "That's wonderful, Mother. Truly a miracle." There was a pause, and then his grandmother's voice dropped to a whisper. "You know, there's something your great-grandmother used to say about our family. That we have the blood of the Cahokia mystics running through our veins. Maybe there's some truth to it after all." Obe's heart raced. The Cahokia mystics? The same mystics connected to the mounds he had visited? The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. He retreated to his room, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. If his grandmother's words were true, then his gift was not just a random occurrence. It was a legacy, passed down through generations. As night fell, Obe lay in bed, the moonlight streaming through his window. He felt a deep connection to his ancestors, the Cahokia mystics, and the sacred mounds. And with that connection came a responsibility, a duty to understand and harness his gift. But with great power comes great challenges. And as Obe drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake off the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Chapter 3. The track field miracle. The sun was high and the air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass as students gathered around the school's track field. The annual track and field event was a highlight of the school year, and the excitement was palpable. Among the participants was James, the school's star athlete, known for his prowess in hurdles. His lean frame and determined gaze set him apart, and whispers of college scholarships followed him wherever he went. Obe, Foster, Alexis, and Morgan had found a spot on the bleachers, their eyes scanning the field. Obe's mind, however, was elsewhere, still grappling with the events of the past few days. The weight of his newfound abilities and his family's mystic lineage weighed heavily on him. The starting whistle blew, snapping Obe back to the present. The runners took their positions, and as the gun went off, they bolted with fervor. James, with his signature grace, effortlessly cleared hurdle after hurdle, his body moving in perfect harmony. But as he approached the final hurdle, something went terribly wrong. A misstep, a momentary lapse in concentration, and James collided with the hurdle. The impact was brutal. His leg twisted at an unnatural angle, and he crumpled to the ground, his screams of pain echoing across the field. The crowd gasped in collective horror, the festive atmosphere instantly turning somber. From his vantage point, Obe could see the extent of the injury. James's leg was clearly broken, the bone jutting out grotesquely. The sight was gut-wrenching, and a wave of nausea washed over him. But amidst the shock and horror, a thought emerged, clear and resolute. I can help. Without uttering a word, Obe closed his eyes and focused on James. Drawing upon the energy he felt at the Cahokia Mounds, he whispered, "May Mother Earth lend James the energy to bounce back and be ready for competition on the weekend." The atmosphere grew tense. A chilling wind swept across the field, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the wind died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. On the track, something miraculous was happening. James, his face contorted in pain, let out a high-pitched scream. Before the eyes of the stunned onlookers, his leg began to move, realigning itself with a series of sickening cracks. The protruding bone retreated, and the swelling reduced. Within moments, what had been a grievous injury was now nothing more than a faint bruise. The crowd was in disbelief. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs into loud exclamations. James, equally stunned, tentatively placed weight on his leg. Finding it stable, he stood up, his confusion evident. He jumped a few times, testing his leg, and then, with a laugh of disbelief, resumed running, faster than he had before. The event continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. The miracle on the track field was the talk of the school, and rumors began to spread like wildfire. Whispers of Obe's involvement reached every corner, and by the end of the day, he was the center of attention. Students approached him with a mix of awe and curiosity. "Is it true, Obe? Did you heal James?" They asked, their eyes wide with wonder. Obe, overwhelmed and unsure of how to respond, retreated from the limelight. But the rumors persisted, growing wilder with each retelling. Tales of his visit to the Cahokia Mounds, his grandmother's miraculous recovery, and now James's healing painted a picture of Obe as a modern-day miracle worker. But with fame came scrutiny. Not everyone was convinced of Obe's benevolence. Whispers of witchcraft and dark magic began to circulate, and a shadow of suspicion loomed over him. As night fell, Obe lay in bed, the weight of the day's events pressing down on him. He was at a crossroads, torn between embracing his gift and the fear of the unknown. The path ahead was uncertain, and Obe knew that he was stepping into uncharted territory. But one thing was clear: his life would never be the same again. Chapter 4. The power realized the days following the track field incident were a blur for Obe. Everywhere he went, he was met with a mix of awe, curiosity, and in some cases, outright fear. Whispers followed him in the hallways, and he could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. The world as he knew it had shifted, and he found himself at the epicenter of it all. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across his room, Obe sat on his bed, deep in thought. The events of the past week played in his mind like a movie reel. The visit to the Cahokia Mounds, the surge of energy, his grandmother's miraculous recovery, and James's healing. Each incident was a piece of a puzzle, and Obe was determined to see the bigger picture. Drawing a deep breath, he decided to experiment. He needed to understand the extent of his abilities. Taking a deep breath, he pricked his finger with a needle. The sharp sting was followed by a bead of blood. Closing his eyes, he focused on the wound, willing it to heal. Moments later, he opened his eyes to find the cut gone, leaving no trace behind. Emboldened by this success, Obe decided to push the boundaries further. He found a wounded bird in his backyard, its wing bent at an odd angle. Gently cradling the bird in his hands, he focused his energy on the injured wing. The bird twitched, and then, to Obe's astonishment, it flapped its wings and flew away, fully healed. The realization hit Obe like a ton of bricks. He had a gift, a power that defied explanation. But with this realization came a flood of questions. Why him? What was the source of this power? And most importantly, what was he supposed to do with it? The weight of his newfound abilities bore down on him. The stories he had heard about the Cahokia mystics, the legends of healers and shamans, all seemed to point to a legacy that he was now a part of. But this legacy came with its own set of challenges. As the days turned into nights, Obe grappled with his gift. He healed minor injuries, from cuts and bruises to sprained ankles. Word spread, and soon, people from all over town were seeking him out, hoping for a miracle. But with each healing, Obe felt a drain on his energy, a toll that was taking its effect. And then there were the skeptics, those who viewed his abilities with suspicion. Rumors of witchcraft and dark magic began to circulate, and Obe found himself at the center of a storm of controversy. He overheard hushed conversations, whispers of the dangers of meddling with forces beyond human understanding. One evening, as Obe sat in his room, he received a visit from an unexpected guest. An old woman, her face lined with age and her eyes sharp with wisdom, stood at his doorstep. She introduced herself as Nana May, a healer from a neighboring town. "I've heard about you, young man," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "You have a gift, but you're playing with fire. The power you wield is not to be taken lightly." Obe listened, rapt, as Nana May spoke of the responsibilities that came with such a gift. "With great power comes great responsibility," she said. "You must learn to harness your abilities, to use them wisely and with caution." She spoke of the dangers of overextending oneself, of the balance that must be maintained between giving and taking. "Every time you heal, you draw upon the energy of the universe," she explained. "But that energy is not limitless. You must learn to replenish it, to give back as much as you take." As the night wore on, Obe realized the gravity of his situation. He had been given a gift, but it was a double-edged sword. The power to heal also came with the potential for harm, and he had to tread carefully. Nana May left him with a warning. "Beware, young one," she said. "There are forces out there that would seek to exploit your abilities for their own gain. You must be vigilant and always trust your instincts." Obe lay in bed, the weight of Nana May's words pressing down on him. He was at a crossroads, torn between the allure of his gift and the fear of the unknown. But one thing was clear: he could not go on as he had been. He had to find a way to harness his abilities, to use them for good while protecting himself from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Chapter 5. Grandmother's Tales. The old family home stood tall, its wooden beams and stone foundation a testament to the generations that had lived within its walls. Obe approached the entrance hesitantly, the weight of recent events heavy on his shoulders. The familiar scent of his grandmother's rose garden wafted through the air, but today, it did little to calm his nerves. He knocked softly, and moments later, the door creaked open to reveal his grandmother. Her once frail frame now stood erect, her eyes sharp and clear. The transformation from just days ago was nothing short of miraculous. "Obe," she greeted, her voice warm yet tinged with a hint of sadness. "I've been expecting you." He followed her inside, the house filled with the soft glow of candlelight. They settled in the living room, surrounded by old family portraits that stared down with solemn expressions. "I have so many questions, Grandma," Obe began, his voice quivering. "About what's happening to me, about our family's connection to the Cahokia mystics." His grandmother sighed, her gaze distant. "It's a tale that goes back many generations," she began. "Our ancestors were among the most revered mystics of the Cahokia civilization. They were healers, seers, and guardians of ancient knowledge." She spoke of rituals and ceremonies, of sacred sites and powerful artifacts. "The Cahokia Mounds," she continued, "were not just burial sites. They were places of power, where the veil between our world and the spirit world was thin." Obe listened, rapt, as she wove tales of ancient ceremonies, of dances under the moonlight, and chants that echoed through the night. Our ancestors could harness the energy of the earth, channeling it to heal, to protect, and sometimes, to harm. But with this power came great responsibility, she warned. The energy they harnessed was not limitless. It had to be used judiciously, with respect and reverence. And there were rules, codes of conduct that had to be adhered to. She spoke of the dangers of misusing this power, of the consequences that befell those who strayed from the path. There were those who sought to exploit this power for personal gain, she said, her voice grave. And they paid the price. Obe's mind raced, trying to process the flood of information. "Why me?" he asked. "Why now?" His grandmother looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of pride and sorrow. "It's a gift that's passed down through the generations," she explained. "Not everyone inherits it, but those who do are chosen for a reason." She reached out, taking his hands in hers. "You have a good heart, Obe," she said. "But you must be careful. The power you wield is a double-edged sword. It can heal, but it can also harm." She warned him of the temptations that would come his way, of those who would seek to exploit his abilities. "You must be vigilant," she cautioned. "And always trust your instincts." As the night wore on, Obe felt a mix of awe and fear. The weight of his family's legacy bore down on him, and he realized the enormity of the responsibility that lay ahead. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind as he left the house, the night air cool against his skin. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers. But with the knowledge and wisdom of his ancestors guiding him, Obe was determined to honor his family's legacy and use his gift for the greater good. Chapter 6. The bully incident. The school bell rang, signaling the end of another day. Students poured out of the classrooms, their laughter and chatter filling the air. But amidst the sea of faces, one stood out. Todd, a quiet, introverted boy, was making his way through the crowd, his head bowed, trying to go unnoticed. But not everyone was willing to let him be. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Derek, the school's notorious bully, and his gang of cronies. With a malicious grin, Derek stepped in front of Todd, blocking his path. "Where do you think you're going, loser?" Derek sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Todd tried to sidestep him, but Derek's gang closed in, forming a menacing circle around the terrified boy. The crowd of students, sensing a confrontation, gathered around, their faces a mix of excitement and fear. Without warning, Derek lunged at Todd, his fist connecting with the boy's face. Todd crumpled to the ground, blood streaming from his nose. But Derek wasn't done. He continued his assault, each blow more brutal than the last. From a distance, Obe watched in horror. The weight of his newfound abilities pressed down on him, and he knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Pushing his way through the crowd, he reached Todd, his eyes blazing with fury. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice commanding attention. Derek paused, his fist raised, a look of surprise on his face. "Who do you think you are?" he spat, his eyes narrowing. Without waiting for a response, Obe knelt beside Todd, placing his hands on the injured boy. Drawing upon the energy he had harnessed at the Cahokia Mounds, he whispered a silent prayer, willing Todd's wounds to heal. The air grew thick with tension, the crowd holding its breath. Moments later, Todd's injuries began to fade, the cuts and bruises disappearing before the astonished eyes of the onlookers. The crowd erupted in murmurs, their shock and awe palpable. Derek and his gang, however, were not so easily swayed. Their faces a mix of suspicion and intrigue, they exchanged glances, realizing that Obe was no ordinary boy. "Who are you?" Derek demanded, his voice filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. Obe met his gaze, his eyes steely. "Someone you don't want to mess with," he replied, his voice firm. Derek's gang, sensing the shift in power, began to retreat, their bravado replaced with uncertainty. But Derek, ever the alpha, wasn't willing to back down so easily. "This isn't over," he hissed, his eyes filled with malice. "You may have your little tricks, but we'll be watching." With that, he turned on his heel, his gang following suit, leaving Obe and Todd alone amidst the crowd. Todd, still in shock, looked up at Obe, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice shaky. Obe nodded, helping Todd to his feet. "Just remember," he said, his voice soft, "you're not alone." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the schoolyard, Obe couldn't shake off the feeling that he had made a powerful enemy. Derek and his gang were not to be trifled with, and Obe knew that he had to be prepared for whatever lay ahead. But for now, he took solace in the fact that he had done the right thing, that he had used his gift to help someone in need. And as he made his way home, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose, a determination to use his abilities for the greater good. Chapter 7. The dark pursuit. The town of St. Louis, with its rich history and vibrant community, had always been a haven for Obe. But as the days turned into nights, the once familiar streets took on a more sinister hue. Whispers of Obe's abilities had spread like wildfire, reaching corners of the town he'd never ventured into. And with those whispers came the attention of forces far darker than any schoolyard bully. It began subtly at first. Obe would catch glimpses of unfamiliar faces watching him from the shadows, their eyes cold and calculating. He'd receive strange phone calls in the dead of night, the line silent save for the faint sound of breathing. But as the days wore on, the incidents grew bolder. One evening, as Obe was making his way home from school, a black car pulled up beside him. The tinted window rolled down to reveal a man in his late 40s, his face scarred and his eyes devoid of emotion. "Obe," the man began, his voice dripping with menace, "we've been watching you." Obe's heart raced, his instincts screaming at him to run. But he stood his ground, meeting the man's gaze. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice firm. The man chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Let's just say we're interested in your talents," he replied, his eyes glinting with malice. Obe's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice shaky. The man leaned in, his face inches from Obe's. "We want you to work for us," he whispered, his breath cold against Obe's skin. "Think of the possibilities, the power you could wield." Obe took a step back, his mind reeling. "I'm not interested," he replied, his voice firm. The man's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have a choice," he hissed, his voice filled with menace. With that, the car sped off, leaving Obe shaken and disoriented. He made his way home, his steps hurried, the weight of the encounter pressing down on him. But the threats didn't end there. Over the next few days, Obe was approached by strangers with ill intentions, each more menacing than the last. They spoke of dark rituals and ancient ceremonies, of the power that Obe's abilities could bring them. Obe, realizing the danger he was in, turned to his grandmother for guidance. She listened, her face grave, as he recounted the events of the past few days. "You're being pursued by forces far darker than you can imagine," she warned, her voice filled with urgency. "They seek to exploit your abilities for their own gain." She spoke of ancient rivalries and power struggles, of the dangers that came with Obe's gift. "You must be vigilant," she cautioned. "And always trust your instincts." Obe nodded, taking her words to heart. He knew he had to be prepared for whatever lay ahead. But as he lay in bed that night, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread, a fear of the unknown. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers. But with the knowledge and wisdom of his ancestors guiding him, Obe was determined to face whatever came his way. Chapter 8. The protective trio, the school library, was dimly lit, the soft glow of the overhead lights casting a warm hue over the rows of books. The clock on the wall ticked away, the only sound in the otherwise silent room. At a corner table, Foster, Alexis, and Morgan sat huddled together, books and manuscripts spread out before them. "We have to find a way to protect Obe," Foster said, his voice filled with determination. "These dark forces, whoever they are, they're after him. And we can't let them get to him." Alexis nodded in agreement, her fingers tracing the lines of an ancient manuscript. "There has to be something in the history of the Cahokia mystics that can help us," she said, her eyes scanning the pages. Morgan, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. "You really believe all this stuff about ancient rituals and protective charms?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt. Foster shot him a look, his patience wearing thin. "We don't have a choice," he replied, his voice firm. "Obe's in danger, and we have to do everything we can to help him." The trio delved deeper into their research, poring over ancient texts and manuscripts. Hours passed, the weight of their task pressing down on them. But just as hope seemed to be fading, Alexis let out a triumphant cry. "I think I've found something," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. She pointed to a passage in one of the manuscripts, her fingers trembling with anticipation. The passage spoke of a protective ritual, a ceremony that could shield an individual from dark forces. It involved a series of chants and the use of sacred herbs, all performed under the light of a full moon. The trio exchanged glances, realization dawning on them. "This could be it," Foster whispered, his voice filled with hope. This could be the key to protecting Ob. But the ritual was not without its challenges. The herbs required were rare and hard to come by, and the chants had to be performed with precision and accuracy. Any deviation could result in dire consequences. Determined to see it through, the trio set out to gather the necessary ingredients. They scoured the town, visiting herbalists and apothecaries, their quest taking them to the farthest corners of St. Louis. As the days turned into nights, the weight of their task bore down on them. But with each setback, their determination only grew stronger. And finally, after days of searching, they had everything they needed. The night of the full moon arrived, the sky clear and the stars shining brightly. The trio, along with Ob, made their way to the Cahokia Mounds, the very place where Ob's journey had begun. They set up a makeshift altar, placing the herbs in a circle around Ob. Foster began the chants, his voice echoing through the night. Alexis and Morgan joined in, their voices harmonizing, the power of their words palpable. As the ritual reached its climax, the mounds seemed to come alive, the energy of the ancient mystics pulsing through the ground. The air grew thick with tension, the very fabric of reality seeming to shift. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The mounds fell silent, the energy dissipating, leaving the trio and Ob standing in the moonlight, the weight of their task lifted. Ob looked around, a sense of peace and calm washing over him. "I can feel it," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "The protection, the shield. It's there." The trio exchanged relieved smiles, the weight of their task lifted. They had done it. They had found a way to protect Ob from the dark forces that pursued him. But as they made their way back to town, the weight of their responsibilities pressing down on them, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The dark forces were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next move. Chapter 9. The ultimate test. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden hue over St. Louis. Birds chirped, their melodies filling the air, but for Ob, the world had come to a standstill. A note, hastily scribbled and left on his doorstep, had turned his world upside down. "We have Alexis. Come alone, or she suffers." The message was clear, and the implications dire. The dark forces were no longer lurking in the shadows. They had made their move. Ob's mind raced, panic threatening to consume him. But amidst the chaos, a spark of determination ignited. He would not let them win. Not without a fight. Drawing upon the energy he had harnessed from the Cahokia Mounds, Ob set out, following the instructions on the note. The path led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, its dilapidated structure a stark contrast to the beauty of the morning. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Shadows danced on the walls, the faint sound of whispers echoing through the vast space. And there, in the center of the room, was Alexis, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear. Surrounding her were figures cloaked in darkness, their faces obscured by hoods. Their leader, a tall man with piercing blue eyes, stepped forward, a malicious grin on his face. "Ah, Ob," he began, his voice dripping with contempt. "So glad you could join us." Ob's gaze never wavered, his focus solely on Alexis. "Let her go," he demanded, his voice firm. The leader chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "All in good time," he replied, his eyes glinting with malice. "But first, a demonstration of your abilities." Ob hesitated, torn between the desire to save his friend and the fear of what his powers could unleash. But the leader was not one to be kept waiting. With a swift motion, he drew a knife, holding it to Alexis's throat. "Now," he hissed, his voice filled with menace. Drawing upon the energy within him, Ob closed his eyes, focusing on the task at hand. He could feel the power coursing through him, the weight of his abilities pressing down on him. And then, with a burst of energy, he unleashed his powers, a wave of light emanating from him, illuminating the room. The dark forces were thrown back, their screams echoing through the warehouse. But the leader was not so easily defeated. Drawing upon his own dark powers, he countered Ob's attack, a battle of light and dark ensuing. The room was filled with chaos, the very fabric of reality seeming to shift. But amidst the turmoil, Ob's focus never wavered. He had one goal, one mission: to save Alexis. With a final burst of energy, Ob unleashed the full extent of his powers, the force of his attack overwhelming the leader. The dark forces were defeated, their reign of terror brought to an end. Ob rushed to Alexis's side, untying her bonds and holding her close. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thanks to you," she whispered, her voice shaky. The two embraced, the weight of the ordeal pressing down on them. But amidst the chaos and destruction, one thing was clear. Ob had passed the ultimate test. He had faced the dark forces and emerged victorious, his powers a force to be reckoned with. But as he looked around the warehouse, the aftermath of the battle evident, he couldn't help but wonder, what lay ahead? The path was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers. But with the support of his friends and the knowledge of his ancestors guiding him, Ob was determined to face whatever came his way. Chapter 10. Embracing destiny, the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden hue over the Cahokia Mounds. The ancient structures stood tall and proud, bearing witness to centuries of history and tradition. Ob stood atop one of the mounds, the wind rustling his hair, the weight of recent events pressing down on him. The battle with the dark forces had taken a toll on him, both physically and mentally. The realization of the true extent of his abilities had been both exhilarating and terrifying. The power he wielded was immense, and with it came a responsibility that he could no longer ignore. As he gazed out at the horizon, memories of his grandmother's tales flooded his mind. Tales of ancient mystics and powerful rituals, of a lineage that stretched back centuries. He remembered her words, spoken with a mix of pride and caution. With great power comes great responsibility. Ob took a deep breath, the weight of those words pressing down on him. He knew he couldn't go back to the life he once knew. The events of the past few days had changed him, had awakened something within him that could no longer be ignored. He thought of Foster, Alexis, and Morgan, of the bond they shared, of the challenges they had faced together. He thought of the dark forces that still lurked in the shadows, waiting for their next move. And he realized that he couldn't face them alone. With a newfound sense of purpose, Ob made his way down the mound, his steps determined. He sought out his grandmother, the one person who could guide him on this new path. She greeted him with a warm smile, her eyes filled with pride. "I knew this day would come," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I knew you would embrace your destiny." Ob nodded, taking a seat beside her. "I've realized the true extent of my abilities," he began, his voice filled with determination. "And I've decided to use my gift responsibly, under your guidance." His grandmother nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "You have a long journey ahead of you," she said, her voice filled with wisdom. "But I have no doubt that you will rise to the challenge." The two sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. But amidst the quiet, a sense of peace and calm washed over Ob. He knew he was on the right path, that he was fulfilling his destiny. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the Cahokia Mounds in a soft, golden glow, Ob made a silent vow. A vow to honor his lineage, to use his abilities for the greater good, to face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage and determination. And as he gazed out at the vast expanse before him, a sense of purpose and determination filled him. He was ready to embrace his destiny, to face whatever lay ahead with the knowledge and wisdom of his ancestors guiding him. The end, for now. We hope you have enjoyed our storytelling offering tonight. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted of future weekly additions to our collections. Paranormal Untold Stories.